First, it was turkey teeth, now it's turkey hair. If you're a guy, you'll probably have seen the photos or even the ads on your socials showing the before and after shots of guys with thinning hair, bald patches, and then they've got this lovely, thick, glossy hair. Or you might have seen videos like this on TikTok.
We are officially 9 days away from me flying out to Turkey and getting my hair transplant.
That's because Turkey has become the go-to destination for cheap hair transplants. And there are thousands of guys who fly in every single year for a new hairline. So how do these transplants work? And are they as safe and successful as they seem to be? First of all, I'm speaking to Chris, who you just heard from at the start. Chris, you're from the States and you went to Turkey last year for a hair transplant. Why did you want to get it done?
I had been balding for a few years at this point, even before I started making content online about it. And I always kind of saw online that there were a lot of people going to Turkey to get transplants. So once I did some more research into it, I realized the main reason for that is because of the price. It's a lot cheaper in Turkey. In order to get a hair transplant in Turkey, it's around 3 to 5 grand, where in the US, it's around 20 to 30 grand for the exact same procedure. So when it came time for me to finally get it done, I knew I was going to Turkey.
What was the actual procedure like? Talk me through it step by step.
The worst part about it is the numbing process, because let me tell you something, that hurts. That is a little painful, but it's only like 4 or 5 minutes, and the whole procedure takes 8 hours, and you're awake the whole time. But the only part that's painful is that first 4 minutes, but you definitely feel that pinch. They literally take anesthesia needles and they numb the whole back of your head, and they go around it about 3 times. And that first time they're going around it, I mean, they're sticking needles in your head and it hurts. But it's the same way, it's done the same way in the US or anywhere. So it's not like, you're getting some like low quality treatment. This is just how the operation is always done. And they extract all the grafts first, and you're on your stomach, and then they flip you over and they numb the top of your head again, which that hurts, but not as much as the back. And then you get like a little break and you have some lunch and your head is all wrapped, and then they unwrap it and they put all those grafts in the top of your head and you are all set to go. The first 10 days are pretty tough for healing. Your whole face swells up, and on day 10 you gotta get rid of all the scabs on the top of your head. But after day 10, literally after the first 10 days after a transplant, you can go back to being a completely normal person again. I used to be fully bald, and you can see even after this transplant it is came in nicely now, and I'm still going back to get another one this year to truly finish the job.
It does look really, really good. Like, I can see you have a very strong hairline now. Are you happy with the results, and why are you going back?
I'm extremely happy. So I was a pretty extreme case. At one point in time, I was fully bald because I need so many grafts to completely fill in my head totally. It's best to do it in two to not risk low density. I could have done it all in one, but I wanted to get the first one to lay a good foundation and then get the next one this year to truly complete the job. And it takes about a year for results. The timeline's cool because I graduate college in June of next year, so by that time I should be able to have no hat and be outside and have a nice full head of hair, and it'll be a big accomplishment. So I'm excited.
Now let's find out more about how this has taken off in Turkey. With me in the studio is Özge Özdemir, a BBC reporter for the BBC Turkish service. Hi.
Hi, hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you. So when you go back to Turkey, do you notice this a lot? Do you see a lot of people recovering from hair transplants?
Yeah, mostly in the historical places, yes. But let me tell you, the first time that I realized, these guys that were coming to Turkey for hair transplant, it was almost a decade ago, and I lived in Istanbul at that time. And while I was walking in the city center, I was seeing these guys with bandages and with dots in their head. And I was thinking, like, is it some kind of a cult, or is it some kind of a group that they have that kind of bandages? So I didn't even know at that time that Turkey was very popular for this thing.
And why is it that Turkey has become such a popular destination for it?
Turkey has been the center of tourism for so long. It offers history, it offers culture, it offers sand, beach, and sun. It has been also investing in medical tourism. There are really good, talented doctors in Turkey. The technology is, especially in the private hospitals, the technology is really good. And they have been also investing in medical tourism and also cosmetic surgeries and hair transplant. It's also because of the currency in Turkish. Turkish lira has been losing value against dollar for so long. So that's also an advantage for the people who are coming to Turkey outside of Turkey. It's an inflation for the people living in Turkey. So there's also this advantage of the price point.
So people can go to Turkey, they get their beach holiday and they get their medical treatment, their cosmetic surgery at the same time. Can you give me an idea of like the scale of the industry? How many of these hair transplants are there every year?
Yeah, the numbers are like, at least just for the hair transplants are not known very much. But the industry for the hair transplant is almost like more than $1 billion. And 1.5 million people come to Turkey for medical tourism. And it can be also oncology and also cosmetic surgeries too. When I talk to tourism representatives, they say that last year, the scale of the industry for hair transplant was $1 billion US. And there are more than approximately 1,000 clinics in Turkey who's doing that kind of hair transplants.
It sounds like it's a thriving industry, but the actual cost of the procedure itself is much less than, for example, in the UK or the US. And you mentioned that the Turkish lira has something to do with it. Why else is it so much cheaper?
For example, there are some packages. People who are, let's say, coming from the US to Istanbul, they stay in luxury hotels. They are picked up from the airports. A translator is assigned for them. And there are also some services that are provided them in the hotel. And they actually do a very luxury holiday and also do the hair transplant. And that kind of a package may be costing $5,000. There's also this competition in Turkey. So there are many clinics, so they have to compete with their prices. For example, while I was talking to tourism representatives, they have been telling me that some clinics have also lowered their prices more last year to compete with each and another. And as the country has been investing in that, there are much more doctors, there are much more technicians. That also makes the price much more cheaper. But in the US, just the hair transplant itself may be costing like $20,000. So there's a huge difference between the prices.
So what does the transplant actually involve? Well, the most common technique is called follicular unit extraction. And this is Chris D'Souza, who is a hair transplant surgeon, and he's also the president of the British Association of Hair Restoration Surgery.
FUE involves taking follicles out individually one by one in their natural groupings, using a tiny punch, usually 0.9 to 1 millimeter in diameter. The main advantage of FUE is that no linear scar is left. Therefore, there will be tiny dot scars where the grafts have been excised. Male pattern hair loss usually presents as a slow, progressive thinning of the hair in typical areas such as the temples and the crown. We do, however, see patients on the younger side where they present with early onset male pattern hair loss. These patients can be understandably concerned. However, it is important to stabilize your hair before proceeding with hair transplant surgery. Stabilization of your hair involves treating the cause, and in this case, the treatment for male pattern hair loss revolves around two medications, finasteride and minoxidil. If you do not stabilize your hair before proceeding with hair transplant surgery, with continued hair loss, you can end up with an unnatural pattern and a less than desirable aesthetic result. Hair transplant surgery, if performed correctly, is a very safe surgery with very few complications. However, it is important to do your research properly and choose your clinic and surgeon wisely.
So, Uzka, back to you. He talked about how it's a very safe procedure. What is the recovery like and what can go potentially wrong?
Yes, as Chris has been saying, normally hair transplant procedure is a very it doesn't involve many risks. But experts suggest that before you do the hair transplant, you have to talk to your doctor, to the physician, and you have to tell if you have any underlying other medical condition. It can be diabetes, it can be a bleeding disorder, it can be anything. So the doctor should examine you they should look at your whole health conditions. And after the hair transplant procedure, normally they don't recommend, they don't want you to sweat for at least, I guess, around a month. So you don't have to do exercise, you don't go to gym, you wash your head very carefully. Also, some hair will be lost in the beginning, so you will be losing some of them, and then you will start seeing the results almost after a year. But in the first couple of weeks, it's really critical for you to do your you have to take care of your head. But in any kind of procedure, there can be infections, there can be bleeding. So if you realize something is not going like orderly, or if you are in pain, you have to talk to the doctor or to the clinic who has done the procedure. Before you go into the hair transplant procedure, they suggest you to talk to the doctor, and the doctor should be saying to you, you are good to go with it. Because for some people, they cannot get any results. So, for example, one expert was suggesting that you have to also ask to the clinic if they reject any patients, because they should be rejecting some patients if they know that they will not be able to get the results.
Have there been any criticisms of the industry, particularly in Turkey?
Yes, because as there is this competition, as it's a market which is you can be making so much money out of it, there is also black market for sure. There are some clinics who are not approved by the health ministry. Normally in Turkey, you cannot do the health advertisement. It's forbidden to make that kind of advertisement and marketing. But as some clinics, quote unquote clinics, target the patients outside of Turkey. For example, they do the website, but sometimes they don't even have the clinic itself, or they don't have the doctors. There are some international boards. For example, one of them is International Society of Hair Restoration Surgery. They can be looking for if the name of the doctor or the clinic is in that list, so that can be a good start. So that's very important for the people to make their research very wisely and not to go for the bargain price.
So scams, right? There will be scams. I also read about some non-medical professionals carrying out some of the operations.
Exactly. For example, some clinics are accused of making the technicians do the operation instead of the supervision of the doctor.
Any operation or cosmetic procedure is, it's a huge step, and hair loss really affects so many men, and it affects their self-esteem. But before people are ready to kind of fork out on a trip to Turkey to have this procedure done, are there other treatments that they could try?
Yes, and that's the reason it's very important for them to talk to a doctor first. What's the reason for the hair loss? Is there any kind of other medical condition behind it for them losing hair? There can be, for example, some medications, finasteride and minoxidil. They can be taking that kind of medications, but they may be also having side effects. So that's very important to talk to a doctor about it. What works best for you? The doctor may be suggesting you to prevent hair loss, some medications and injections, but we have to be keeping in mind that that kind of medications and injections are to strengthen your hair, to thicken your hair, and to prevent the hair loss. But to regrow the hair, there is not any technology other than hair transplant for now. That's the reason there are so many men who prefer going to Turkey to have the hair transplant.
Let's hear more from Chris now about what difference it's made to him.
You know, it might sound shallow or whatnot, but it is just the cold hard truth. People do look at you when you're young, and if you're balding, they go, oh, damn, he's balding. Like, you know what, it just is a common thing, even if it's not necessarily a bad thing, because I like, that's the message that I want to preach as well. It's not a bad thing to go bald at all. People can't control it. So if you're someone that just wants to shave it and rock it, that's a power move, and you do that, and that's awesome. But nowadays, there are resources out there to change that if you want to go down that route. And there's also nothing wrong with that as well. I think sometimes I get a mix of comments from people where some people are like, doing all of this just for hair is crazy, just embrace it. And I agree with that, but also I'm perfectly fine with doing all of this to get my hair back, because at the end of the day, when I am feeling a lot more confident when I look at myself in the mirror, especially being a younger kid still in college, it hit me kind of early. I'm happy to see the influence I've been able to gain from it and the positivity that's come from it also. I think it's a good thing.
Chris, thank you. Özge, thank you so much for coming into the studio. It's been great to have you on.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. I'm Hannah Gelbart. This is What in the World from the BBC World Service, and we'll be back with another episode soon. See you then.